Hey everybody at Compass Academy. My original goal when I was going to film this particular lesson on goal setting was to do it normally, like in the studio with everybody, but it is now complicated because I had an accident where, I don't know if you can see this, but turns out I blew a tendon from my left arm off of my forearm. I had to go in and get some emergency surgery done. And so I'm a little behind the eight ball on being able to get into the studio. Now, I've been teaching this for almost 30 years now. And when I talk about goal setting, people tend to think that it's either on one side of the equation, either super easy, just set some goals, or they make it super complicated. Now, you guys can probably already figure that out. And the two main areas that I've seen people make mistakes in goal setting are primarily, number one, intuition, which of course has its benefits for sure. I'm not trying to say that it doesn't. But the other tending mistake on the other side of the spectrum is what I call just deep analysis, which is also incredibly usable in the right scenario. In crisis, for example, if there's something that is time sensitive, it has to be done. There's an emergency. A proven intuitive leader, I really think in that situation has the edge because he or she has responded to the problems. They've set some clear, achievable goals in the crisis. A great example of that is watching George W. Bush right after 9/11. His ability to organize the country into a united front was really, really spectacular. However, if you have plenty of time and plenty of money, good in-depth research can be a really powerful tool so you can plan some wise goals for both now and in the future so you can address some complications and some thinking about the ends and the means and all those kinds of things. So I think both intuition and analysis are important. Intuition on one side and analysis on the other are the outside edges of good goal development. There's a lot of ground in the middle that's far more productive during normal life, which, of course, like you have already figured out, is where most of ministry leadership happens, just during the day-to-day normal stuff. So the first part of the lesson is understanding what's going on when we set goals and how we function in this regard. Now, it's a normal thing, and there's a little bit of lack of understanding as part of the way as the enemy keeps us from working in our best. Here's what I'm trying to get at. Lots of times we don't take into account how much spiritual opposition there is to us setting and achieving clear goals. All right. But the second part of this teaching is an actual step-by-step process to help you facilitate better goals and better leadership in your ministries at Compass. Okay? A guy named Charles Hummel used to lead a ministry called IVP, InterVarsity Press, and all of its different it was a global campus ministry. And Charles Hummel wrote a little pamphlet called The Tyranny of the Urgent. It's a great little pamphlet. You should read it. And he had a good reason for this. He was running a publishing company and a global ministry. He talked about how things that feel urgent feel like they are the boss, the master. They just dominate your time, right? He makes this statement: the winds of other people's demands and our own inner compulsions have driven us onto a reef of frustrations. I don't know if you've ever felt like that. I have. We struggle with both our boundaries, telling people no, and our own wishes and demands. So when we struggle with these two things, we find ourselves most of the time, again, remember, you might not be this person, so if you're the exception, that's fantastic. But I think most people are left with a good intention, good wishes, right, to do well. But we find ourselves with extremely limited time and energy. Now, when we kind of gather ourselves together, we get our feet under us, and we get passionate about something, we try to find a way to do it anyway. And everybody, I think most all over the world, has this tendency that even if we feel limited, we will still, if we are passionate about it, tend to overpromise and underdeliver. Now, I don't mean that as a statement about people's intentions. In fact, the contrary. People have good intentions to do good will for Jesus, but when we feel overwhelmed, we tend to either promise nothing, right, or our passion surfaces and we say, no, I'll take the sacrifice no matter how big it is, and we overpromise, but then we underdeliver. Okay, imagine this scenario. You see a new ministry or a new opportunity, something that touches your heart deep inside. You find yourself asking some questions. Maybe it's something that resonates with you when you were reading the Bible. So because you see this new opportunity, this ministry, you talk with someone at the church in order to get involved. You go ahead and you realize a few things. A, if this works, could be life-changing for people, or you could meet some amazing people involved. B, you have never maybe felt so alive and fulfilled this, and it gets so exciting. Now, I'll tell you that if you do these things, that this particular thing, when you first do it, it tends to last a bit when you feel alive and fulfilled. What tends to happen, though, is this is the point, I think, where the enemy starts to realize you might be a real threat. So, things like this. The next step would be something like you get a little bit busier at work, right? Or something happens at home or with your car, maybe. Maybe these are not just or, these are or and. Then, inside the middle of that, somebody gets their feelings hurt. And as it grows, it turns out it becomes more complex. It's a little harder to realize that, if this is going to grow, it's going to have to expand and need more responsibility. And then all of a sudden, this kind of ministry seems to look a little bit more like a burden, right? And you start to feel to yourself, maybe, man, the church is asking too much. I'm just a volunteer. They don't pay me for this. Then imagine yourself, all of a sudden, you might have to feel under the weather a little bit, or another different good opportunity comes up. And you might say to yourself, they got a lot of people who could do this. There's a lot of different people who could play this role. I'm not that important. You know what? I'm not going to make it tonight. And in short order, like a lot of other things, that particularly good opportunity in ministry fades and is gone. Now, the reason each of you who are engaging me on this website, right, you might be nodding your head or thinking to yourself, oh yeah, that's happened to me before. So if we're already aware of this kind of thing that happens, how do we address this better? Now, in this section, I want to talk about a couple of steps that are needed. Now, in my opinion, these steps, if you're going to be a good leader, in particular, a ministry leader, that is, not being paid full time, ready? These things are going to be important for all of you. Here's the two steps. Number one, accurate evaluation of your capacity. Okay? Now that's serious. And the second one is developing your ability to execute and deliver your goals. I'm not saying that you have to become that kind of person instantaneously. I'm saying you have to have both a very accurate understanding and a plan to develop how you execute and deliver on your goals. So, with those two things in mind, let's start with the first one, accurate evaluation. Now, my first plan when I was going to record this was to use a whiteboard and draw this out, but I'm going to hopefully get this on the screen here with you. There's a guy named Stephen Covey that many years ago wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he talked a little bit about how something that was really key was learning which quadrant of time and demand you're in. And I'm going to show you those quadrants here on the screen, I hope. Quadrant 1 are things that are both important and urgent. These are when your boss says, hey, get this done or you're fired. This is when your kid needs to go to the emergency room. These are the things that are urgent and important. Quadrant 3, of course, are things that are not important, but they're urgent. This is where people really get tripped up. This is lots of things and communications and emails and texts and phone calls, and it feels like you have to be doing this right now. It feels like everything is a fire in this particular thing, and it's not a big deal, but it's a big enough deal. If you don't do it, it feels like it's going to get out of control. Quadrant 4 is stuff that's not important or urgent. Clearly, we should do less of that. But quadrant 2 are things that are not urgent, but are very important. And what's interesting is what most people tend to do is ignore quadrant 2 because it's not screaming for our attention. And when we get too tired and we realize that we've lost kind of all our reserves, we get down into quadrant 4 where we're doing stuff and it's just wasting time. But we'll use words like Sabbath or me time, stuff like that. when you talk about this concept of accurate evaluation, we got to make sure that we are thinking clearly about what quadrant we're in and why we're doing it. So here's what I'm trying to say. Any kind of goal will be derailed by the urgent or what feels best, or by compulsions that are either inward or external. Now, are you somebody that has ever wished for like 30 hours in a day, right? I don't know if you're like me, but I've been like, man, if I just had some more time, I could get so much more done. What's interesting is that Jesus only had 24 hours in a day. The apostles only had 24 hours in a day. Jack Welch, Alexander the Great, anybody, same thing, right? Now, the truth is, we know hard work doesn't hurt us, right? We know it's good for us. An accomplishment is a good lift in our psychology, but being overly busy is not that helpful. So having a clear evaluation of your capacity and knowing how much you can give, right, and knowing which quadrant you're in and knowing why that's important is essential, because whenever you say yes to something, that's 10,000 no's. It really is. If you say yes to being involved in student ministry, it's no to every other kind of ministry that meets on Wednesday nights. So the kicker is whatever you're willing to say no to. Not only do we have time constraints, other people's compulsions, right? We have learned that our willpower has been proven to exist in limited quantities. Ooh, this is scary, right? We just think to ourselves, if I was just a little more devoted, if I were just a little more serious about Jesus. But that's not actually the case. People's willpower is kind of, we've all got kind of a cap. And once we spend it, we're out. Now, at this point, you might need to press pause on the video and list out all of the things you have on your plate. I'm not saying you have to. I'm just saying if you really want to get an accurate evaluation of your capacity to lead at Compass, you need to think in terms of what is there. You have to be ruthlessly honest, and you have to think in terms of what must I say no to in order to say yes to leadership. Right? You know this is true. If you're going to be gone 3 weeks of a rooted session, you might not be able to fit it in. If you are required to participate, you have to stop something else in order to do this. You have to take some time, week by week, to work through these quadrants and see if you've carved out time for the things you're committed to. One of the things when people ask me about how to do this is I try to talk about what are the things on your stop doing list that you need to work on. That's probably one of the most helpful things I've ever learned, is to have a stop doing list. Now, I am not Amish, and I'm not a Luddite. If you don't know what that means, I can tell you later. I'm not opposed to television or things like that, but most of the time, not always, most of the time, I have a rule about not watching TV. It's not because I'm judging people or anything like that. It's literally that I don't have any defenses or willpower against an interesting television show. But if I don't have a TV in my living room, if I don't have access to TV, and I choose not to do it, if I fast from it or I'm going to stop it, it gives me more time at home to do things I really care about, things that I'm interested in, things that I want to accomplish, in particular, my reading life and my prayer life. So a stop doing list is something that is going to be really, really important. Now, if you can do that, if you can get an accurate understanding of what you have available, if you can do all that, and if you can make sure that you have the space, then you can start developing your ability to execute on these things. Now, again, let me just reemphasize, you might need to stop the video for a minute and make a stop doing list. Make a list of all the things you've got to do, all your responsibilities. And if your stop doing list is important, that will help. If you think to yourself, all right, no, I have an accurate picture of it. I have a pretty good idea of how much I can give. The next thing is talking about how do you develop your execution and crafting of your goals so that you can do this better at Compass. Now, the things I'm going to talk about might seem simplistic, but in practice, they are not. They play to our nature, They help our ability rather than work against our nature. And the truth is, working with how God made you is the only way to really get things done. Again, I know it sounds simplistic, but number one, attendance, right? Show up. Now, I know how this sounds. You have to start by simply evaluating if you have the will and the time to be at your ministry experiences. I remember when we talked, we had lots of people when I was a youth pastor say, hey, we want to get involved with the youth program. And I would say, all right, here's my requirements. And they had to be there on Sunday mornings, Wednesday nights, and Sunday nights at some point. And they had to pick two of the three. They had to get involved. They had to go to 2 different events in the year, all that kind of stuff. And I would have people go, oh, I don't have that much time to attend those things, but I'd like to help with blah, 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 whatever. Here's the truth. You have to be able to attend. If you cannot, listen to me, if you do not have time to attend to the things you're involved with, leadership is not in the cards for you. Of course, as you get better at saying no, as you carve out time for this, what happens is as you attend, you start to develop a sense of belonging, of course, and as you sacrifice your time to be there, you'll develop a sense of urgency and ownership. But on top of that, your attendance tells other people of just how serious you are about this. Now, when people talk about attendance, they say, well, I'm really busy. And my response to that is, you are the one who gets to your calendar first. If people say, hey, can you meet with me at a certain time? One of my comments is, hey, I say I'm already booked. Now, for example, if they try to schedule a meeting during a time when I have dedicated that time to pray and fast or think and try to be with God, what I'll say is, sorry, I'm already booked during that time. Now, if I've got enough lead time, if I have some other time, I can say, you know what, I'll move that time in a different place in my calendar and I'll accept that invitation. But I want you to know something. It's never easy because as soon as I move that calendar, somebody else wants that time as well. If you think to yourself, oh, I can pray later. That's one of those quadrant 2 things that is never urgent, but is incredibly important. And you know what? Unless you really carve that into your calendar, you probably won't. So rule number 1, you have to get to your calendar and show up. You just have to make time to attend. Second thing, start doing small jobs first. So you got to attend. You got to be there. You got to be there regularly. And then second thing is you got to start doing small things. Now, this is literally just the things like, hey, are the chairs set up? Are the tables set up? Now, granted, lots of different people can do that job. But when you do the small things, you're doing a couple things. You're first off proving that you can make this level of margin work. You do have the time, you do have the energy and the willpower to do it. And the second thing is you are adding value when you're there. You're not just watching. You're not just standing on the back wall observing how ministry is going. You're actually adding value. Jesus talked about those who are faithful in little things will be trusted with much. Now, that's not just kingdom stuff, right? Why won't a nonprofit board hire a powerful young leader who has no experience and track record? Well, why did the Apostle Paul call them elders instead of leaders? In 1 Timothy chapter 3, Paul is talking about how these people are supposed to be. These elders are supposed to be self-disciplined. They're supposed to be able to manage their entire household well. And in that era, that usually meant there was some sort of small business on their front door, something like that. They had to make sure they were not new converts, all excited and not proven. The deacons, for example, he talks about in 1 Timothy 3, had to already be tested. They had to show that they've proven themselves. He says, and then once they've proven themselves, then you can let them serve as deacons. So the leadership in the church was already used by Paul with the same concept. You have to start with the small things. You have to show up and you have to do the small jobs so you can prove not only that you're there and you're adding value, but other people can watch and see that you're doing those little things. So as you do this, add value, and as you gauge that you have more margin to do so, you are going to be asked to lead at a higher level. I promise. When I watch somebody show up, be faithful, do the small things, when I first started thinking about, okay, I need some help with something more important, those are the people I go to. So the third thing is to underpromise and overdeliver. Now, if you're somebody who loves to help and you love to step in and help in a good moment, this can be challenging, right? It's easy to underpromise and underdeliver. Right? That's my nature because I'm an introvert. It's mine to be like, man, maybe I can get there, and if it doesn't happen, I go, see, I told you. But it's also easy to overpromise and underdeliver, right? There's actually a title for this. It's called a changing target for failure. What that means, if you say, all right, we're going to try to reach 50 people this year for Jesus or something like that, or we're going to get 50 new people to apply for the Leadership Compass Academy, something like that. And only a few people do it. When we look backwards after the deadline, we go, you know what? If one person came to Christ, it was worth the effort. If we only got 15 people to sign up, it was worth the effort. And what happens is we realize we didn't deliver on our promise, and we lower our target, or we change it after the fact. That's just normal behavior. But if you can underpromise and overdeliver, people start to trust you. You say, I think I can get this much, and you start regularly over-delivering on that. People start to look at you and go, oh yeah, I can see this person's regularly somebody I can trust to get done what he or she says they can get done. So with that being the case, let me give you a few ways that you can practice under-promising and over-delivering. So if you're a note taker, this is letter A, language. Here's what I mean. Don't exaggerate, especially when you estimate how many people or what kind of numbers are involved. This is hard to do. And of course, everybody knows the joke of the preacher's count, right? There was about 50 people there. What was it, 50? Or was it like, 27? You round up, that kind of thing. And I get it. And there's a time to just go, yeah, I don't know, maybe 100. But the truth is, when you start talking about what you think you can do in the future, keep your numbers as accurate as possible. Try not to think about what you hope will happen, but what you really think will happen. Watch your language. Second thing is be prepared. Think in terms of both processes and people. This is things like making sure there's enough snacks and somebody will bring the snacks, enough seats. Someone's gone through the planning processes. Someone has already reserved the facilities. The tables will be set up the right way. And the follow-through is things like texting the right people, make sure they're going to be there, that kind of stuff. Another one, clean up. If you leave places cleaner than you found them, people will normally trust your leadership. This was a lesson I learned when I was a youth pastor in Amarillo, Texas. My boss was a terrific leader, mentor. And after every week of camp, we had our own buses. We didn't rent anything. We had our own big bus, people movers, vans, things like that. We'd get back from a week of camp. Everybody's exhausted. And my job was to make sure that before I put all the vehicles away, every one of them had to be fully gassed up, and every one of them had to be swept out and clean so that the next week, everything was ready to roll. We could leave out of the bus barn, no problems. Now, that felt like a huge chore at the time, and in particular when I thought to myself, I'm the guy who's leading it next week. Why do I have to do this? What I realized was every parent that got on their bus with their kid saw a clean bus, things were ready to go. They began to trust that Scott and I were leading a good youth ministry together. Fourth thing is reporting on what happened. Make sure that you discuss what actually happened. Well, a bunch of folks showed up and it was a good time. Kids had a great time. Talk about what actually happened. We played 9 square for 20 minutes. Talk about, we had X amount of people show up for a Rooted Serve project. And the last thing about all these, about how to develop this is persist and keep trying again, right? Think about all the times that you yourself have volunteered for something and you heard nothing back from the pastor or coach. You showed up, you did something, and then it was over. And you think to yourself, I want to volunteer, but what did we actually do? Or worse yet, if you said, put me in, coach, I'm ready to volunteer, and nothing actually happens. There were no opportunities to volunteer. Lots of people at churches like ours think to themselves, you know what? They don't care. They don't need me. That's not true. Of course we care. Of course we need you. The truth is, most ministries tend to be overwhelmed and have not near enough leadership involved, especially levels of leadership where people are actually under-promising and over-delivering. All right. So a quick review. If you're going to do this well, you have to make sure that you attend, make sure you do your small jobs, and then under-promise and over-deliver. As you do these things, you start to become trusted by both yourself, your subconscious will believe, no, I'm making time for this, this is doable, and the leader of your ministry. Now, it takes practice and anyone can do it. But here's the truth. If everybody from Jesus to Lee Iacocca uses this kind of methodology to get people involved in leadership, everything from corporate mega world down to Jesus talking to the disciples about whoever is faithful with little will be given much. It's a fundamental part of how it means to be a leader. If you need more help on how to understand quadrants about what's urgent and important, because I've worked with a lot of people who think everything's both urgent and important, that's one of the things I'd be happy to coach you on when we meet together. But I just want to make sure that you think in terms of setting goals well for your ministry. Hey, I really appreciate you. Sorry for the weird video version of this. Hope it goes well. Talk to you soon.